A soldier faced court-martial for abandoning $60,000 worth of military equipment in a combat zone. The charges were serious: dereliction of duty, failure to secure government property, potential dishonorable discharge. His defense was impossible to believe. He said he had to make a choice: equipment or a life. The military prosecutor laughed, said the defendant abandoned critical gear for a cat, a stray cat in Iraq. The courtroom went silent. Then the defendant said 5 words that changed everything. That cat saved 12 soldiers. Nobody believed him until the witnesses testified, until the evidence was presented, until a military court had to decide whether one life was worth $60,000 of gear. Subscribe right now and turn on notifications, because what you are about to hear will challenge everything you think you know about military discipline, about the value of life, and about decisions made in impossible moments. This is the story of Corporal David Martinez, a 23-year-old logistics specialist who made a choice that should have ended his career. This is the story of Radar, a scraggly orange cat who appeared in a war zone and refused to leave. This is the story of a court-martial hearing that became about something much bigger than equipment and regulations. Before we continue, smash that like button and drop a comment telling me where you are watching from, what city and country. Your engagement determines whether stories like this reach the people who need to hear them. March 2007, Fallujah, Iraq. The surge was in full effect. American forces were conducting constant patrols through neighborhoods that had been insurgent strongholds months earlier. Corporal David Martinez was assigned to a forward operating base on the eastern edge of the city. His job was logistics, managing supply convoys, tracking equipment, making sure front-line units had what they needed when they needed it. It was not glamorous. It was not combat arms, but it was critical. Without logistics, armies stop functioning. Without people like David tracking every piece of gear, operations fall apart. David took his job seriously. He was meticulous, organized, by the book. His superiors trusted him with expensive equipment because he never lost anything, never damaged anything, never failed to account for every item in his inventory. He had been in Iraq for 7 months, had 4 months left on his deployment, was planning to re-enlist when he got back. The military was his career, his future. He was good at it. He was building something. Then he met a cat that would cost him everything. The cat appeared at the forward operating base in early March. Nobody knew where it came from. Stray animals were common in Iraq. Dogs mostly. Cats occasionally. They wandered onto bases looking for food. Most soldiers ignored them. Some fed them scraps. A few tried to adopt them as unique mascots. But animals on base were officially prohibited. Health concerns, rabies risk, operational security. Command would tolerate a stray for a few days. Then someone would be ordered to remove it. Remove usually meant driving the animal outside the wire and releasing it, which usually meant the animal died. This particular cat was orange, short hair, scraggly, underfed. One ear had a notch in it like something had bitten a piece off. He was young, maybe 6 months old. He showed up near the logistics area where David worked, started hanging around the Connex containers where supplies were stored. David noticed him immediately, started leaving food, water. The cat was skittish at first, would not let anyone get close, but he kept coming back, day after day, always to the same spot near David's work area. David started calling him Radar, because the cat seemed to know when convoys were coming back before anyone else did. He would show up at the gate 10 minutes before vehicles arrived, every time, without fail. David thought it was coincidence at first. Cats have good hearing. Maybe Radar heard the engines before humans did, but it was more than that. Radar would show up before the engines were audible, would sit by the gate staring down the road. Then 10 minutes later, convoy headlights would appear. It happened to consistently to be coincidence. Other soldiers noticed too, started joking that Radar had some kind of sixth sense, started paying attention when Radar acted strange. One afternoon, Radar started pacing near the perimeter, agitated, meowing loudly, refusing to calm down. Soldiers thought he was just being a weird cat. Then mortars started falling 20 minutes later. 3 rounds landed inside the wire. 2 soldiers wounded. After that, People started taking radar seriously, started watching his behavior, started trusting his warnings. David became radar's unofficial handler, fed him daily, made sure he had water, built a shelter from empty supply crates. Radar started following David everywhere, would sit outside the logistics office while David worked, would sleep near David's bunk, would walk perimeter with David during inspections. They developed a bond. David had grown up with cats. His family always had them. Being deployed in a war zone was isolating, stressful, constant low-level fear. Having radar around made it bearable, made it feel less like existing and more like living. Command knew about radar. Officially, they ignored him. Unofficially, they appreciated the morale boost. Soldiers worked better when they had something besides war to focus on. As long as the cat did not cause problems, command looked the other way. But that unofficial tolerance had limits, and David was about to discover exactly where those limits were. April 2007. David was assigned to escort a supply convoy to a forward patrol base 15 miles west of Fallujah. Standard mission: 3 vehicles. For soldiers, supplies including communications equipment, weapons parts, ammunition, medical supplies. Total value of cargo approximately $60,000. David was vehicle commander in the lead truck. His job was navigation and security, making sure convoy reached destination safely, making sure all cargo was accounted for and properly transferred. They left at 0600, early enough to avoid worst heat, early enough to complete mission and return before dark. The route was considered relatively secure. Recent patrols had reported no contact, no sign of enemy activity. But in Iraq, relatively secure meant nothing. Every convoy was dangerous. Every mile of road could hide explosives. Every overpass could conceal a sniper. David had done dozens of these runs, knew the risks, knew how to stay alert. They were 3 miles from destination when radar appeared. Just appeared. In the middle of the road ahead of them. David saw orange fur in the distance and could not process what he was seeing. Radar should have been at the base. Should have been 15 miles away. There was no possible way the cat could be here. David radioed the other vehicles, told them to hold position, got out to investigate, walked forward carefully, weapon ready, scanning for threats. It was definitely radar, same notched ear, same scraggly orange fur. The cat was sitting in the middle of the road, meowing frantically. When David got close, radar ran 20 feet, stopped, looked back, meowed again. David followed. Radar ran another 20 feet, stopped, looked back. He was leading David somewhere, away from the road, toward a cluster of abandoned buildings. Every instinct David had said this was wrong, said turn around, get back to convoy, complete mission. But radar had been right before, about the mortars, about the convoys. David kept following. Radar led him to a partially collapsed building, stopped at the entrance, would not go inside, just sat there meowing and staring at the doorway. David approached carefully, looked inside, saw wires, saw a battery pack, saw what was unmistakably an improvised explosive device, huge, packed with artillery shells, positioned to detonate remotely. David backed away slowly, got on radio, called for explosive ordnance disposal, reported what he found. The disposal team arrived 40 minutes later, examined the device, confirmed it was active, confirmed it was massive. Estimated yield would have destroyed all 3 convoy vehicles if detonated. Estimated kill radius would have taken out everyone in the convoy. They asked David how he found it. David said his cat led him there. The team looked at each other, looked at radar sitting calmly nearby, did not ask any more questions. Sometimes in war, you do not question good luck. But here is where the story gets complicated. While David was following radar, while he was waiting for the disposal team, while he was focused on the bomb, the convoy was vulnerable, sitting stopped in the middle of hostile territory. Other soldiers maintained security, but David was vehicle commander, his responsibility, and he had abandoned his post, abandoned his vehicle, abandoned $60,000 of equipment to follow a cat. Nothing bad happened. Convoy was fine. Equipment was fine. Mission was completed once disposal team cleared the device. Everyone returned safely. David thought that was the end of it. Thought he would get maybe a verbal warning about leaving his vehicle. Thought command would understand given the circumstances. He was wrong. 2 days after the mission, David was ordered to report to his commanding officer. When he arrived, a legal officer was present. David knew immediately this was serious. The commanding officer was Captain Morrison, 15-year veteran, combat experienced, respected by his soldiers, but also a stickler for regulations. Morrison looked tired, looked like he did not want to be having this conversation. He told David to sit, then explained the situation. Command had reviewed the mission report, had reviewed David's actions, had determined that David committed serious violations, abandoning equipment, abandoning post, failure to maintain security. These were not minor infractions. These were court-martial offenses. David tried to explain, tried to tell Morrison about radar, about the cat's history of warnings, about finding the bomb. Morrison cut him off, said he read the report, said he understood David found an explosive device, said that did not change the fact that David violated multiple regulations. Morrison said he had tried to convince command to handle this with non-judicial punishment. Article 15, loss of rank, loss of pay, but command refused. They wanted to make an example, wanted to send message that abandoning equipment would not be tolerated regardless of circumstances. David asked if Morrison was serious, asked if command really wanted to court-martial him for following a cat that found a bomb. Morrison said yes. That was exactly what command wanted to do, because from their perspective, David got lucky. He abandoned his post and happened to find a bomb, but he could have abandoned his post and gotten his entire convoy killed. Luck did not justify dereliction of duty. David sat there trying to process this. He had saved lives, had prevented catastrophic attack, and his reward was court-martial. The legal officer explained David's options. He could accept non-judicial punishment if command changed their mind. He could request court-martial and defend himself. He could plead guilty and hope for leniency. The legal officer recommended pleading guilty, said fighting this would only make command more angry, said David should accept punishment and move on. David asked what punishment he was looking at. Legal officer said dishonorable discharge was possible. More likely bad conduct discharge. Definitely loss of rank. Definitely loss of pay, possibly brig time. David asked for time to think. Morrison gave him 24 hours. David left that office feeling like his world was ending. He had spent 5 years building military career, had planned to make this his life, had been good soldier, by the book, reliable, and now he was facing discharge because he followed a cat that saved 12 lives. It made no sense. It was not justice. It was bureaucracy. It was command covering themselves. It was sacrifice of one soldier to maintain appearance of order. David did not sleep that night, laid in his bunk staring at ceiling. Radar slept curled up next to him, purring softly, completely unaware that he had destroyed David's career. David thought about pleading guilty, thought about accepting punishment, thought about going home in disgrace. Then he thought about that bomb. Thought about what would have happened if he had not followed radar. Thought about 12 soldiers who would be dead. Thought about their families, their wives, their children, and he decided he could not plead guilty, could not accept that saving lives was wrong. The next morning, David told Morrison he wanted court-martial, wanted his day in court, wanted to present his case. Morrison looked disappointed but not surprised, said David was making a mistake, said command would crush him, said the evidence was clear. David said he understood, but he needed people to hear the truth, needed them to understand what actually happened. Morrison nodded, said he respected that, said he would do what he could to help, but warned David not to expect much. The court-martial was scheduled for June 2007, 2 months away. That gave David time to prepare, time to gather evidence, time to find witnesses. The legal officer assigned to defend him was Lieutenant Hayes, young, inexperienced, fresh out of law school. Hayes was honest with David from the start, said this was his 3rd court-martial, said he had lost the first 2, said the odds were not good, but said he would do his best. Hayes and David started building their defense. The strategy was simple. Prove that radar's warnings were legitimate. Prove that following radar was reasonable decision given past behavior. Prove that finding the bomb justified the violation. They needed witnesses. Soldiers who had seen radar predict convoy arrivals. Soldiers who had seen radar warn about the mortar attack. Soldiers who had been on the convoy that day. Hayes started interviewing people. Started gathering statements. Most soldiers were willing to testify. Wanted to help David. But command started applying pressure. Soldiers were told that testifying for David could impact their own careers. Were told that supporting dereliction of duty made them complicit. Were told to think carefully about where their loyalties lay. Several soldiers who initially agreed to testify changed their minds. Hayes was furious. Said command was intimidating witnesses. Said that was illegal. But proving it was different matter. Nobody would admit they had been pressured. Meanwhile, radar continued living on base. Continued providing warnings. In May, radar started acting agitated near the motor pool. Pacing. Meowing. Refusing to calm down. Soldiers remembered last time radar acted like this. Remembered the mortars. They reported it to command. Command ordered sweep of perimeter. Found two insurgents placing explosives near the wire. Insurgents were captured. Attack was prevented. Radar had done it again. Hayes wanted to introduce this incident as evidence. Wanted to prove radar's behavior was consistently reliable. Command refused. Said events after David's violation were not relevant to his court-martial. As trial date approached, David's situation got worse. Other soldiers started avoiding him. Not because they blamed him, but because association with him was dangerous. Command made clear that David was example. That supporting him meant questioning authority. David understood. Did not blame anyone for protecting themselves. But isolation was painful. He had few friends left. Radar was one of them. The cat stayed close. Seemed to sense David was struggling. Would sleep pressed against David every night. Would purr when David felt most hopeless. Hayes kept preparing. Kept gathering evidence. Kept building case. But he was honest with David. Said the evidence would not matter. Said military justice was different from civilian justice. Said command had decided David was guilty before trial started. Said court-martial was just formality. David asked what Hayes recommended. Hayes said plead guilty. Accept punishment. Move on. David said no. Hayes asked why. David said, because those 12 soldiers deserved to have someone say their lives mattered more than regulations. The court-martial began on June 15, 2007. Military courtroom on base. Panel of officers serving as jury. Military judge presiding. Prosecutor was Major Brennan. Career officer, experienced, knew military law inside and out. He opened with simple statement. Corporal Martinez abandoned his post. Abandoned government property. Violated multiple regulations. His reasons are irrelevant. Military cannot function if soldiers abandon duty whenever they feel like it. He called witnesses. Soldiers who confirmed David left his vehicle. Confirmed he was gone for extended period. Confirmed equipment was vulnerable. Confirmed mission was jeopardized. Hayes cross-examined. Asked if any equipment was damaged. Answer was no. Asked if any soldiers were injured. Answer was no. Asked if mission failed. Answer was no. Brennan objected. Said outcomes do not justify violations. Judge agreed. Told Hayes to move on. Hayes called his own witnesses. Soldiers who testified about radar's warnings. About the mortars. About convoy predictions. About consistent pattern of behavior. Brennan objected repeatedly. Said cat behavior was not relevant. Judge sustained most objections, but allowed some testimony. Jury heard about radar's history. Heard that David had reason to trust the cat. Then Hayes called the explosive ordnance disposal specialist who had cleared the bomb. Asked him to describe device. Specialist said it was one of largest improvised devices he had seen. Said yield would have been catastrophic. Said anyone in kill radius would have died instantly. Hayes asked if convoy would have been in kill radius if device had detonated. Specialist said absolutely. Hayes asked how device was discovered. Specialist said Corporal Martinez reported it. Hayes asked why Martinez was in position to find it. Specialist said he followed his cat. Brennan objected. Said this was hearsay. Judge overruled. Said specialist was testifying about what Martinez told him. Hayes asked specialist what he thought about that explanation. Brennan objected again. Said specialist's opinion was not relevant. Judge sustained. Hayes had no more questions. Specialist left stand. David thought testimony had gone well. Thought jury heard what mattered. Hayes looked less optimistic. Final witness was David himself. Hayes put him on stand. Asked him to explain what happened. David told story. Leaving base. Seeing radar. Following him. Finding bomb. Called for help. Everything happened exactly as reported. Hayes asked why David followed Cat. David said because radar had been right before. Because every instinct said trust him. Because something made him follow. Hayes asked if David regretted his actions. David said no. Hayes asked even knowing he faced discharge. David said those 12 soldiers were alive. Their families still had them. That mattered more than his career. Brennan cross-examined. Asked David if he knew regulations prohibited leaving post. David said yes. Asked if he knew regulations required protecting equipment. David said yes. Asked if David understood that feelings and instincts do not override orders. David hesitated. Said he understood regulations, but said regulations did not account for situations like this. Brennan pounced. Said that was exactly the problem. Said soldiers cannot pick which regulations to follow based on feelings. Said military requires discipline, requires obedience. David had neither. Trial concluded. Jury deliberated for 3 hours. Returned with verdict. Guilty. David sat there feeling numb. Judge asked if David had anything to say before sentencing. Hayes whispered that David should apologize, should show remorse, should beg for leniency. David stood up, looked at judge, looked at jury, said he had something to say. David spoke clearly, steadily, without anger or bitterness. He said he understood the verdict, understood he violated regulations, understood military requires discipline, but he said he wanted jury to understand something. He did not follow radar because of feelings. He followed radar because evidence suggested radar could detect threats, multiple incidents, multiple witnesses, consistent pattern. Following radar was calculated risk based on available information. Finding bomb proved risk was justified. David said he understood that outcomes do not justify violations, understood that luck is not defense, but said this was not about luck. This was about recognizing unusual intelligence in animal, about trusting established pattern, about making split-second decision that saved lives. David said if given same choice again, he would make same decision, because 12 soldiers were worth more than $60,000 of equipment, because regulations exist to protect lives, not property, lives. Judge listened without interrupting. When David finished, judge asked if that was all. David said yes. Judge said thank you. Dismissed David from stand. Then judge did something unexpected. He addressed jury, said he wanted them to reconsider something, said he wanted them to think about why regulations exist, said regulations are not ends in themselves. They are tools, tools to accomplish mission. Mission is protecting American soldiers and completing objectives. Judge asked jury if David's actions accomplished mission. Jury looked confused. Prosecutor objected. Said judge was improperly influencing jury. Judge said jury already delivered verdict. He was addressing them for different reason. Judge said he wanted jury to understand something about military law, about justice, about purpose of court-martial. Purpose is not punishment. Purpose is maintaining order, maintaining discipline. But discipline serves higher purpose. Discipline keeps soldiers alive. Discipline completes missions. Sometimes discipline requires following regulations exactly. Sometimes discipline requires judgment. Knowing which situation requires which is leadership. Judge said David showed leadership, showed judgment, showed courage to trust his assessment over standard procedure. Prosecutor stood up, said respectfully that judge was undermining verdict, said jury found defendant guilty, said sentencing should proceed. Judge said he agreed. Sentencing would proceed, but he wanted his statement on record, wanted his perspective clear. Then judge announced sentence, reduction in rank to private, forfeiture of 1 month pay, 30 days restriction to base. No discharge. No brig time. No permanent mark beyond loss of rank. Courtroom went silent. David could not process what he just heard. Hayes looked shocked. Prosecutor looked furious. Said respectfully that sentence was inappropriately lenient. Said command expected severe punishment. Judge said command could appeal if they wished. But this was his courtroom. His decision. He believed punishment fit crime. Defendant violated regulations. He was being punished. But defendant also saved 12 lives. That deserved consideration. Gavel came down. Court-martial was over. David left courtroom in daze. Hayes caught up with him outside. Said that was most unusual court-martial he had ever seen. Said judges almost never speak like that. Said sentence was gift. David needed to accept it and move on. David agreed. Asked Hayes what happens now. Hayes said David serves his restriction. Takes his demotion. Then returns to duty. Career is damaged but not destroyed. David can rebuild if he works hard. David thanked Hayes. Hayes said thank David's cat. Said without Radar's history, verdict would have been worse. News of court-martial spread quickly. Through base. Through military networks. Through media. Story was too interesting to stay contained. Soldier court-martialed for saving lives by following cat. Judge gives minimal sentence. Command furious. Media loved it. Started calling. Wanting interviews. Wanting to tell story. David refused all requests. Said he just wanted to return to duty. Wanted situation to fade away. But situation was not fading. It was growing. Veterans organizations got involved. Said David's case highlighted bigger issues. Said military justice system was broken. Said soldiers being punished for showing initiative. Said regulations had become more important than results. They started petition. Demanding David's rank be restored. Demanding command issue apology. Petition got 50,000 signatures in 2 weeks. Command was embarrassed, angry, but powerless to stop growing public support. David served his 30 days restriction. Stayed on base. Worked his assigned duties. Kept head down. Tried to avoid attention. Radar stayed with him throughout. Command had ordered Radar removed from base after court-martial, but soldiers refused to comply. They hid Radar, moved him between different areas, made sure he was always somewhere safe. Command knew what was happening, but forcing issue would only create more problems, so they pretended not to notice. During restriction, something else happened. Other soldiers started sharing their own stories about Radar, incidents David had not known about. Times Radar had acted strangely before something bad happened. Times soldiers had dismissed his behavior. Times they wished they had paid attention. These stories were documented, submitted to command, submitted to media. Built case that Radar was not just lucky cat, was demonstrating consistent pattern of threat detection. Scientists got interested. Animal behaviorists, military researchers. They wanted to study Radar, wanted to understand how he detected threats. Proposed bringing Radar to research facility, running tests. David refused permission. Said Radar was not lab rat. Said Radar had earned right to live peacefully. Researchers argued this could save lives, could lead to training programs, could change how military used animals. David still refused. Said Radar had done enough, deserved rest. When restriction ended, David returned to regular duty. Still private, still demoted, but something had changed. Soldiers treated him differently, not with pity, with respect. He had been willing to sacrifice career for what he believed was right, had stood up to court-martial, had taken punishment without complaint. That earned respect. David started getting more responsibility, started being trusted with important tasks. His immediate supervisors knew he had been made example. Knew punishment was political. They worked round it. Gave David assignments that matched his actual capability. 6 months after court-martial, Captain Morrison called David to his office. David reported expecting more problems. Instead, Morrison had news. Command was quietly reviewing David's case. Public pressure had worked. They wanted to restore David's rank, wanted situation to go away. But they needed David's cooperation, needed him to stop being symbol, needed story to fade. Morrison asked if David would accept rank restoration in exchange for silence. No more media, No more public statements. Just return to being soldier. David thought about it. Thought about fighting. Thought about staying symbol. Thought about all soldiers who faced similar situations. But he was tired. Tired of being example. Tired of attention. Tired of fighting command. He told Morrison yes. He would accept rank restoration. Would return to silence. Just wanted to do his job. Morrison nodded. Said restoration would happen quietly. No ceremony. No announcement. Just paperwork correction. David's rank would be restored. His record would note court-martial, but also note sentence was served and rank restored. It was not perfect, but it was done. Radar continued living on base for next 3 years. Never officially authorized. Never officially removed. He became base legend. The cat who predicted attacks. The cat who saved convoy. The cat who ended career and started movement. Soldiers took care of him. Made sure he was fed. Made sure he was safe. Made sure his story was remembered. David remained Radar's primary handler. They were bonded. Connected by shared experience that nobody else fully understood. In 2010, David's unit deployed to Afghanistan. Different war. Different terrain. Different threats. David was now sergeant. Rank restored plus promotion. He had rebuilt career. Had proven himself valuable. Had moved past court-martial. But question remained. What about Radar? David could not take him to Afghanistan. Regulations absolutely prohibited. But leaving Radar behind felt wrong. Felt like abandoning partner. David found solution. Contacted rescue organization that helped military animals. Explained Radar's history. Asked if they could take him. Find him home. Organization agreed. Said given Radar's fame, finding adoptive family would be easy. David said no. He had specific requirements. Family had to be military. Had to understand what Radar represented. Had to promise Radar would never be used for research or publicity. Had to let Radar just be cat. Organization said they would try. They found perfect family. Retired Marine Corps sergeant living in North Carolina. Wife was VA nurse. They had followed David's story. Had been outraged by court-martial. Had signed petition. They understood what Radar meant. They promised Radar would have good home. Would be honored. Would be loved. David met them before deploying. Saw their home. Saw how they prepared for Radar. Felt confident this was right choice. He said goodbye to Radar knowing Cat would be safe. Would be appreciated. Would finally have peaceful life he deserved. David deployed to Afghanistan. Spent 12 months in Kandahar province. Dangerous deployment. Constant contact. Multiple close calls. He thought about Radar often. Wondered if having Radar there would have helped. Wondered if Radar would have warned about threats. Wondered if more soldiers would be alive if cats like Radar were officially recognized. Those thoughts stayed with him. Shaped his perspective. Made him start thinking bigger. When David returned from Afghanistan, he visited Radar in North Carolina. The cat was thriving. Healthy. Happy. Living comfortable life with family who adored him. Radar recognized David immediately. Purred. Rubbed against him. They spent afternoon together. David told Radar about deployment. About soldiers they had saved. About how Radar's story had inspired people. Radar just purred. David left knowing Radar was where he belonged. David stayed in military for 8 more years. Made it to sergeant first class. Became respected leader. Trained young soldiers. Taught them about judgment. About initiative. About knowing when to follow regulations and when to think beyond them. He never forgot court-martial. Never forgot lesson. Regulations exist for reason. But regulations serve mission. Mission is protecting soldiers and completing objectives. Sometimes those goals conflict. Making right choice in those moments defines leadership. Asterisk in 2018. David retired from military. 20-year career. Honorable discharge. Multiple awards. Solid record. Court-martial was note in his file, but no longer defined him. He moved to North Carolina, near Radar's adoptive family. Got job with Veterans Organization, helping soldiers transition to civilian life. Stayed connected to Radar, visited weekly, watched Cat age peacefully. Radar lived to 13 years old, died quietly in sleep, surrounded by people who loved him. David was there when it happened. Held radar, said thank you, said goodbye. After radar died, David started getting calls. From media, from veterans, from organizations. They wanted to honor radar, wanted to tell full story, wanted to create memorial. David initially refused, said radar had lived quietly, should be remembered quietly. But calls kept coming, story kept spreading. New generation of soldiers wanted to know about Cat who predicted threats, about soldier who chose Cat over career, about court-martial that became movement. David eventually agreed to limited interviews, told radar's story carefully, focused on facts, on evidence, on pattern of behavior, avoided mysticism, avoided exaggeration. He wanted people to understand radar was not magic, was animal with enhanced threat detection capability. Science could explain it, could replicate it, could train other animals. That was point. Not that radar was supernatural, but that military should take animal detection seriously. Scientists agreed. Years after radar died, research confirmed what David had known. Cats can detect chemical signatures humans miss, can hear frequencies humans cannot, can sense environmental changes that indicate threats. Military started experimenting with formal animal detection programs, dogs mostly, but some cats. Radar had been right all along, had been detecting real threats through real biological mechanisms. David felt vindicated, felt radar's sacrifice meant something. The court-martial became case study, taught in military leadership courses, used to discuss tension between regulations and judgment, between discipline and initiative, between following orders and thinking independently. Different instructors drew different conclusions. Some said David was wrong, should have followed regulations regardless. Others said David was right, should have trusted assessment. Most said situation was complicated. Both perspectives had merit. That was point. Leadership is navigating complicated situations without clear answers. David started speaking at military conferences, sharing his experience, talking about decision-making under pressure, about trusting instincts while respecting structure, about cost of doing right thing. Young officers loved his talks, said they felt pressured to follow regulations even when regulations made no sense, said they feared punishment for showing initiative. David told them fear was reasonable. System punishes deviation, but system also needs leaders who think, who make hard choices, who accept consequences. In 2020, journalist contacted David, wanted to write book about radar, about court-martial, about movement that followed. David agreed on conditions. Book had to be accurate, had to respect military, had to honor soldiers who testified, had to present multiple perspectives. Journalist agreed, spent year researching, interviewing people, gathering records. Book published in 2021, became modest success. Reached people beyond military, started broader conversation about judgment and rules. Book brought new attention. Veterans Affairs got involved. Said David's case highlighted need for reform, need for military justice system that accounted for context, need for commanders who valued results over compliance. They commissioned study, looked at cases like David's, found pattern, found soldiers being punished for showing initiative, for thinking independently, for making judgment calls that worked but violated regulations. Study made recommendations. Some implemented, some ignored, but conversation started. David never regretted his choice, never wished he had left radar behind, even knowing cost, even knowing pain of court-martial, even knowing his career was damaged. Those 12 soldiers were alive. That mattered more than anything. He stayed in contact with some of them. They thanked him, said they owed him their lives. David always corrected them, said they owed radar. He just followed Cat. Cat did real work. Looking back, David understood why command prosecuted him, understood they had to maintain discipline, had to show soldiers that abandoning equipment had consequences. But he also understood that rigid application of rules destroys initiative, destroys judgment, creates soldiers who follow orders without thinking. Military needs both, needs discipline and initiative. Finding balance is hard, sometimes impossible, but trying matters. David also understood something else. Radar was unusual. Most animals do not predict threats, do not show consistent detection patterns. Following random animal would be stupid, would be dereliction of duty. But Radar was not random, had established credibility. Following him was calculated risk based on evidence. That distinction mattered. David had not abandoned post on whim, had made informed judgment. That was leadership. In 2023, David was invited to speak at West Point, at Officer Training School. He told Radar's story, told about court-martial, told about lessons learned. Young cadets asked questions, asked what they should do in similar situations. David said he could not tell them, said every situation is different, every decision is unique, but said they should think, should evaluate, should trust their judgment while respecting structure, should be willing to accept consequences for their choices. That was being officer. That was being leader. After speaking, Cadet approached David, said her father had been on that convoy, had been one of 12 soldiers saved by Radar, said her father talked about David constantly, said David was hero. David felt uncomfortable, said he was not hero, just made choice. Cadet disagreed, said making hard choice despite consequences is definition of heroism. David did not argue, but privately he disagreed. Heroes were soldiers who died protecting others. He just followed Cat and got court-martialed. That was not heroism. That was survival. But Cadet's comments stayed with him, made him think about how others perceived his story. To him, it was about one choice in one moment, about trusting animal that had proven reliable, about accepting punishment for violation. Simple, straightforward. But to others, it was bigger, was symbol, was example of soldier who put lives over regulations, who stood up to system, who paid price for doing right thing. David understood that interpretation, but felt it oversimplified what happened. Truth was complicated. David had been lucky. Lucky Radar was legitimate. Lucky bomb was real. Lucky his gamble paid off. If Radar had been wrong, if there had been no bomb, David would be disgrace, would have abandoned post for nothing, would have endangered convoy for Cat. Verdict would have been harsher. Sentence would have been worse. Career would have ended completely. David understood that, understood how close he came to total failure. Luck played role. He could admit that. But luck was not whole story. Pattern was real. Evidence was real. Radar had demonstrated threat detection multiple times before convoy incident. Following him was not blind faith, was calculated assessment based on observable behavior. David made best decision possible with information available. That decision happened to be correct, but even if outcome had been different, process was sound. That was what military leadership instructors missed. They focused on outcome. Right outcome meant good decision. Wrong outcome meant bad decision. But quality of decision should be judged by information available when decision was made, not by results that came after. David started teaching this principle, started speaking about decision-making process, about gathering evidence, about weighing risks, about accepting uncertainty, about making best choice possible and living with consequences. Military audiences responded, said this was what they needed, not rules about when to break rules, but framework for thinking through impossible situations, framework for making choices when no option was clearly right. In 2024, David was contacted by Military Working Dog Program. They were developing new threat detection protocols, wanted David's input, wanted him to consult on recognizing reliable detection behavior versus random animal actions. David agreed, spent 6 months working with program, helped develop criteria, helped train handlers, helped create system for validating animal warnings. Program became successful, started catching threats other methods missed. David felt Radar's legacy continuing, felt like court-martial had been worth it, but David also felt conflicted. Part of him wondered if speaking about Radar encouraged other soldiers to make reckless choices, to follow instincts over regulations, to trust animals without evidence. He did not want to be responsible for soldiers getting hurt because they followed his example. Without understanding nuance, he started emphasizing that more in talks, started stressing difference between informed judgment and reckless abandon, started warning against romanticizing his story, Some people accused David of backtracking, said he was undermining his own message, said military had broken him, made him afraid to advocate for initiative. David disagreed, said he was clarifying, was adding context, was preventing misinterpretation. His message was not ignore regulations, was not follow feelings, was think carefully, gather evidence, make informed choices, accept consequences. That was leadership. That was responsibility. David also started talking about cost, about what court-martial did to him, about isolation, about fear, about damage to career, about relationships that broke, about trust that was destroyed. He had paid price for his choice, real price, not just emotion and restriction, but psychological cost, emotional cost. That cost was worth it given outcome, but it was real. Anyone making similar choice should understand that, should count cost before acting, should be prepared to pay. This honesty made David more credible, more trusted. He was not selling heroic narrative, was not pretending choice was easy, was acknowledging complexity, acknowledging pain, acknowledging that doing right thing often hurts. That made his message more powerful, more authentic. Young soldiers responded, said they appreciated honesty, appreciated acknowledgement that leadership is hard, that choices have real consequences. In 2025, documentary crew contacted David, wanted to film full story, interview witnesses, visit locations, create comprehensive account of radar and court-martial. David was hesitant, said story had been told, said he did not want more attention. Crew persisted, said new generation needed to hear this, said lessons were timeless, said documentation mattered. David eventually agreed, said crew could film if they agreed to show complexity, no simplification, no hero worship, just honest account. Documentary took 2 years to produce. Crew interviewed David extensively, interviewed soldiers from convoy, interviewed witnesses from court-martial, interviewed judge who presided, interviewed radar's adoptive family. They went to Iraq, filmed locations, found site where bomb had been, talked to local people who remembered American soldiers and Orange Cat, built comprehensive picture. Judge's interview was revealing. He said David's court-martial had bothered him for years, said he believed verdict was wrong, said regulations should not override results, said military needed more soldiers who thought independently, but said his hands were tied. Jury found David guilty. All judge could do was minimize sentence, express disagreement through leniency. He had done what he could within system, but wished system allowed more flexibility. Soldiers from convoy were unanimous. David saved their lives. Radar saved their lives. Court-martial was injustice. They had tried to testify, had tried to defend David. Command shut them down, intimidated them, made them afraid to speak. They regretted that, wished they had been braver, wished they had stood up for David the way he stood up for them. David told them not to feel guilty, said he understood pressure, said they had families, had careers, could not risk everything. Documentary premiered in 2027. Military Film Festival. Packed theater. Standing ovation afterward. People crying. People angry. People inspired. Documentary sparked renewed debate about military justice, about animal detection, about leadership, about when to follow rules and when to think beyond them. Some commanders hated it, said it undermined discipline. Others loved it, said it promoted critical thinking. Debate was healthy, was exactly what military needed. David watched documentary alone, did not attend premiere, did not want attention, watched at home, cried through most of it, not from sadness, from memory, from seeing radar again, from hearing soldiers talk about being saved, from reliving court-martial, from understanding how much had changed. Documentary was honest, showed his mistakes, showed his fear, showed complexity. He was satisfied with that. After documentary, David received thousands of messages from soldiers facing similar situations, from officers trying to promote initiative while maintaining discipline, from families grateful their loved ones were saved, from animal handlers learning threat detection, from people inspired by story. David read every message, responded when he could, offered advice, offered support. became informal mentor to soldiers navigating impossible choices. David also heard from command, from officers who had prosecuted him, from some who had pushed for harsh punishment. Some apologized, said they understood now what David had been trying to do, said they wished they had handled it differently. Others defended their actions, said they had duty to maintain order, said they would make sane choices again. David appreciated both responses, appreciated honesty, appreciated that people were thinking about these issues. So here is what David wants you to understand from his impossible story. Rules exist for reason. Discipline matters. Structure matters. Military cannot function without soldiers following orders. But rules are tools, not ends in themselves. They serve mission. When rules conflict with mission, judgment is required. Making that judgment is terrifying. Accepting consequences is harder. But that is leadership. That is responsibility. If you are in military, think carefully before breaking rules. Gather evidence. Document patterns. Make informed assessment. Do not follow instinct blindly. Do not trust feelings without foundation. But also do not follow rules blindly. Do not ignore evidence because it does not fit procedure. Think. Evaluate. Make best choice possible. Then accept whatever comes. That is being professional. That is being leader. If you are commander, create space for judgment. Punish recklessness. Punish incompetence. But do not punish informed decisions that happen to violate regulations. Understand difference between soldier who abandons post on whim and soldier who makes calculated choice based on evidence. Both violated rules, but one showed judgment, other showed negligence. Treat them differently. That creates culture of thinking. That creates effective military. If you are civilian, understand military faces impossible situations. Situations where every choice is wrong. Where following rules means people die. Where breaking rules means career ends. Soldiers navigate these situations constantly. They need support. They need understanding. They need recognition that doing right thing often costs everything. Do not romanticize their choices. Do not ignore their pain. Do not pretend leadership is easy. David's story is not fairy tale, is not simple narrative of hero standing up to system, is complicated story of soldier who made informed choice, got lucky with outcome, still paid severe price, spent years rebuilding, eventually found vindication, but carries scars forever. That is reality. That is truth. Anyone telling simpler version is lying or simplifying. Radar was exceptional animal. Most cats do not detect threats. Most animals do not show consistent warning patterns. Following random animal would be stupid, would be dereliction of duty. David followed radar because radar had established credibility through multiple incidents. That distinction matters. Evidence matters. Pattern matters. Random intuition is not leadership. Informed judgment is. Court-martial was necessary. Command had to maintain discipline, had to show abandoning equipment has consequences. But sentence could have been harsher. Judge showed mercy, showed understanding, showed that system can accommodate nuance when individuals within system care about justice. That gives hope. That shows change is possible, not through destroying system, through thoughtful people within system making better choices. Movement that followed court-martial accomplished things, changed conversations about military justice, inspired research into animal detection, helped soldiers feel empowered to think, created space for discussing when rules should bend. Those outcomes mattered. Those outcomes saved lives. David's sacrifice created those outcomes. That makes sacrifice meaningful, but does not erase cost. Both things are true. David is now 50 years old, retired, working with veterans, still consulting on animal detection programs, still speaking about leadership, still carrying memories of court-martial, still grateful to radar, still in touch with soldiers from convoy, still processing what happened, still learning, still growing. That is life. That is reality. No neat conclusions, no perfect endings, just continuing journey. If this story affected you, think about what it means. Think about times you faced impossible choices. Think about times you followed rules that felt wrong. Think about times you broke rules that felt right. Think about consequences. Think about whether you would make same choices again. Think about what leadership means to you. Think about what matters when everything conflicts. Share this story if you believe others need to hear it. Support veterans who face these situations. Support animal detection programs. Support military justice reform. Support creation of systems that value judgment alongside discipline. Support soldiers who think critically. That is how change happens, not through destroying institutions, through supporting people within institutions who try to make them better. David's final message is simple. Rules matter. Judgment matters. Evidence matters. Consequences matter. All of these things are true simultaneously. Navigating that complexity is hard. Accepting responsibility for choices is harder. But that is what leadership requires. That is what service demands. Anyone unwilling to accept that cost should not lead. Anyone willing to accept that cost deserves support. Radar died peacefully, surrounded by love. His life mattered. His warnings saved lives. His story inspired change. His legacy continues through programs that take animal detection seriously, through soldiers who think critically about when to follow rules and when to think beyond them, through commanders who create space for judgment, through system that slowly becomes more flexible. That is Radar's gift. That is what David protected by risking everything. And that is the story of soldier who chose cat over equipment, who faced court-martial, who accepted punishment, who rebuilt career, who started movement, who taught leadership, who honored animal that saved lives, who lives with consequences, who would make same choice again, who understands that doing right thing costs everything and is worth it anyway. Pay attention to animals in your life. Not all animals are radar, but some have abilities we do not understand, have senses we do not possess, have knowledge we cannot explain. Do not dismiss them. Do not ignore them. Observe patterns. Document behavior. Make informed assessments. Trust evidence. That is how Radar's legacy lives, through people who pay attention. Pay attention to impossible choices in your life, to moments when rules conflict with what feels right, to situations where every option has cost. Those moments define you, not moments when choice is easy, moments when choice is impossible. How you navigate those moments determines who you are, what you stand for, what you will sacrifice. Choose carefully. Accept consequences. Live with integrity. David chose 12 lives over career, chose evidence over regulations, chose judgment over compliance, paid price, rebuilt, grew, taught others, made difference. That is enough. That is what anyone can hope for. Not perfection, not heroism, just making best choices possible and living with results. That is all any of us can do. So when you face impossible choice, remember David, remember Radar. Remember that doing right thing costs everything. Remember that cost is worth it. Remember that evidence matters. Remember that judgment matters. Remember that consequences are real. Remember that rebuilding is possible. Remember that your choices matter. Remember that one person can make difference. Remember that animals have wisdom we do not understand. Remember that rules serve mission. Remember that mission is protecting lives. And remember that court-martial hearing changed everything. Not because verdict changed, not because system changed completely, but because one soldier stood up, said what he believed, accepted consequences, started conversation. That conversation continues. That conversation matters. That conversation saves lives. Be part of that conversation. Stand for what matters. Accept what comes. That is leadership. That is honor. That is service. David Martinez chose life over equipment. Radar saved 12 soldiers. Court-martial could not erase that truth. History remembers what matters. Regulations fade. Outcomes endure. Lives saved endure. Lessons learned endure. That is David's legacy. That is Radar's legacy. That is why story matters. That is why you need to share it. That is why paying attention changes everything.